Islamist terrorists are hunting down Westerners in India's most luxurious hotels.
It was covered in thick blood.
A coordinated attack by bloodthirsty killers has brought a buzzing metropolis to a grinding halt.
This was India's 9/11.
Mumbai is in flames. There is panic on the streets. And as the death toll rises, confusion reigns.
They didn't know at any time if it was going to be someone to save them or it was going to be someone to take them out.
Hopelessly outgunned, the local police are no match for the heavily armed terrorists.
The baddies had the guns, the goodies had nothing.
There is only one unit capable of rising to the challenge.
You can't use maximum force. It has to be precise force.
But it will take all their training, raw courage, and superhuman endurance to win the day.
These were some extremely motivated and brave men.
This is the dramatic story of Operation Black Tornado. The mission that puts India's elite black cats on the Special Forces map. In a hijacked fishing boat, a gang of Islamist militants are heading for the city of Mumbai, formerly known as Bombay. Their intent? To target Westerners throughout the city in a coordinated terror strike that will result in an orgy of death and destruction. Mumbai is the richest, most populated city in India. It prides itself on its Western influence.
Mumbai is a busy, crazy, hectic, wild place, absolute assault on the senses.
Mumbai, to Americans, is considered a wealthy city, home to Bollywood, home to luxury hotels, luxury boutiques. It's considered an investment city.
Between 8 and 8:30 p.m., a gang of 10 men, all heavily armed and with provisions to last days, slip ashore at this point, just minutes away from their intended targets, in the heart of the city. The evening is like any other, bustling and busy as people hit the streets and relax after work. British tourist Harnish Patel was enjoying a few drinks with a friend at the world-famous Leopold Cafe.
The Leopold Cafe is a very popular bar cafe where a lot of Westerners, locals and tourists meet for food and drink. I recall from walking into the bar, it was completely packed.
Local journalist Surav Mishra was also enjoying a drink when he saw two visitors that weren't there for the beer.
But I saw people moving around, you know, quite a few people moving around. They seemed out of place to me.
Must have been 15, 20 minutes in. Suddenly I heard a gunshot and what sounded like a lot of glass dropping at once.
I just hear ta-ta-ta-ta-ta, and then something hits me.
Two gunmen are firing AK-47s from the doorways, spraying the cafe with bullets.
A lot of shouting and screaming, people rushing around.
When I came out of the door, I realized there's something which is holding me back. Then I see that blood is flowing out of my body.
There were a lot of bodies. The floor was just covered in thick blood. And then suddenly everything went silent. And clearly the guy was reloading. And it was during that round that I was hit.
After a sustained attack, the gunmen flee into the night, leaving the dying and the wounded to their fate.
It really was a case of being in the wrong place at the wrong time.
Across town, a taxi carrying two more gunmen heads for the crowded Central Railway station.
The Victoria Terminus would be akin to an attack on Grand Central.
I think the targets are fantastically well chosen. I think if you look at the station, that's the busiest station in Mumbai.
Mingling with the people they intend to kill, they walk through the crowded passenger hall. At 21:53, the gunmen pulled AK-47 assault rifles from their bags and unleashed a devastating hail of bullets into the crowd. "104 people were injured and 58 were killed."
My first reaction when I saw the shots, I told my wife, I said, this is not gang warfare. This is a terrorist attack.
What took people by surprise was the fact that the way Mumbai was chosen, very clearly designed to show that nowhere is safe in India anymore.
It is now clear that Mumbai is under a sustained terrorist attack, but no one knows who is behind it or where they will strike next.
We begin with a mass terror attack in India's largest city, Mumbai.
Millions watch as the events unfold live across India's news networks.
Well, this is clearly an unprecedented scale of a terror attack on Mumbai, and the center.
One viewer is Jyoti Krishan Dutt, the Director General of India's elite National Security Guard. And after watching the events unfold, he orders his Black Cat commandos to stand by. Nicknamed the Black Cats because of their distinctive uniforms, the National Security Guard commandos are the ideal unit for the situation.
The National Security Guard was set up around the mid-1980s when India actually first faced the threat of urban terror.
The Black Cats have two principal areas of expertise: counter-terrorism and counter-hijacking, and they are also experts in hostage rescue.
The NSG is a highly specialized force designed and structured on the lines of some of the world's key anti-terrorism special units like the SAS, GSG-9, the US Navy SEALs.
The men are all drawn from the Indian Army.
Everybody in the NSG who comes to join the organization is a volunteer. Right? And he's put through a probation at Manesar, which is 30 kilometers south of Delhi.
All recruits are put through a rigorous screening process, assessing physical fitness, shooting standards, and psychological profiling.
They look at people who have commando mindsets and therefore are willing to do the unusual in unusual circumstances. So they look for people who are out of the box.
Those who are left, then they are put through a brutal regime of physical training, special operations training, like, for example, room shooting practices, building interventions, bus intervention, metro intervention, and bomb disposal training.
And it takes anything up to 1 year for a soldier to be fit to be employed operationally.
Their extensive skills and specialized training make the Black Cats India's elite special forces unit and the ideal troops to take on the terrorists in Mumbai.
They are daredevils, they are first-rate troops, and I can vouch for that.
But the question is, how will they deal with a gang of well-armed, committed terrorists spread out across India's busiest city? Mumbai, 26th of November 2008. Reports are coming in of a series of gunfights and explosions.
At 9:15, armed with AK-47s, gunmen launched their first attack.
The city is under a prolonged and remorseless attack from an unknown number of highly armed and rapidly mobile terrorists.
One did not exactly know where and what was happening, and whatever information we were getting was from the media.
The Leopold Cafe has been hit. So has the main train station. Now, there are reports of gunfire at a local hospital and a police station. Time bombs left in taxis by the terrorists detonate in different parts of the city. Reports are already coming in that 74 people have been killed and 147 wounded.
I think within 1 hour, 1 hour, 15 minutes, I was absolutely sure that this was a huge story, possibly the biggest terror attack in India.
At this stage, the authorities have no idea what is going on. Instead, the best intelligence is from social media.
It was really the first time that Twitter played a very big role in our news coverage. People posting links to cell phone images, people who were giving first-hand accounts.
From the sheer number of messages, the scale of the attacks and sense of panic on the ground is obvious. But with so much conflicting information, it is impossible for the authorities to build up an accurate intelligence picture. BBC correspondent Mark Dummett was scrambled to the scene of the attacks.
It was stunning, it was shocking that this was going on in India. It was so confusing because it was taking place in lots of different locations. I mean, at that stage, even the government had no idea what was going on.
The sudden assembly of the world's media means that there is now mounting pressure on the Indian authorities. It later became clear that grabbing worldwide attention was a key part of the terrorists' plan.
It was meant to last a long time. It was meant to attract the attention of the world.
Gunfire, explosions, and terror in Mumbai.
The timing played perfectly into a Western news schedule.
119 people have been killed and 315 wounded, including 3 Americans.
Remember, it happens at night in Mumbai. It's daytime in New York.
The global media coverage adds to the sense that the Indian government has lost control of the situation. Over 1,000 kilometers away in Delhi, India's elite Black Cat commandos are on standby and waiting to deploy. But until the Director General, J.K. Dutt, is tasked by the government to launch a counter-terror operation, they are powerless to intervene. In Mumbai, the situation is escalating. 2 hours into the attacks, the terrorists target 2 of Mumbai's most famous hotels, the Oberoi Trident and the Taj Palace, home to around 830 guests. Completed in 1903 at a cost of over £127 million in today's money, the Taj Palace Hotel is Mumbai's greatest landmark. Built by J.N. Tata, the father of Indian industry, the hotel has 560 rooms and 44 suites. It was also the first hotel in India with a steam-powered elevator. From royalty to rock stars, princes to presidents, the Taj has always been home to the world's elite. An attack on such a landmark building will have far-reaching implications.
You get a lot of bang for your buck. More specifically, you get Americans, you get Brits. And we know that that was really the goal here, was not just to send a message to the Indians, but also to send a wider message to the international community.
Reports come in of shootings and explosions at the city's iconic Taj Palace Hotel.
I think the image that's burned into everyone's mind of this incident, of this event, is that of the Taj Palace Hotel and the flames coming through the roof.
Whenever anybody talks of Mumbai terror, this is the shot. Taj on fire.
With Mumbai's greatest landmark up in flames, the terrorists are delivering a clear message. Nowhere is safe.
The fear factor was very high, which is always one of the very first goals of these kinds of attacks.
Mumbai's first line of defense is the local police force. But this coordinated attack totally exceeds their training, and they are overwhelmed.
Some of the senior policemen had been caught up in the violence, and the head of the anti-terrorism squad from Mumbai had been shot dead.
When you are dealing with, hardcore, highly motivated terrorists who are willing to die and who have been well trained, well equipped, it is difficult to, handle those guys if you are a normal policeman.
Until the Black Cats are called in, the only other special forces on hand are a few units from the locally based Marine Commandos, the Marcos. But they can do no more than try to contain the situation.
The naval commandos are not meant to operate in these situations. They are for a different purpose altogether. So therefore, the militants had the freedom to move anywhere inside the hotel.
With the city's police in complete meltdown and no one to stop them, the terrorists continue on their rampage at the Oberoi and the Taj Palace hotels. After setting rooms on fire and indiscriminate shootings, the gunmen hunt down more valuable targets.
They were targeting British, American, European travellers.
The hotels are full of Westerners and VIPs. This presents them with the possibility of extremely high-profile hostages. British businessman Tim Reed was trapped inside the Oberoi Hotel.
When I heard the terrorists getting closer to me, my legs were shaking uncontrollably, and all I could think about was how painful might it be to be shot, how quickly would it end, and thinking about my family and my 8-month pregnant wife.
Over 1,000 kilometers away in Delhi, the Director General of India's elite counter-terrorism unit, the Black Cats, is aware of the developments. He has been impatiently watching the unfolding scenes on TV, desperately awaiting government authorization to deploy.
There was a reluctance on the part of the government in Mumbai to come to terms with the level of attack that was taking place.
As the death toll rises, 83 people have been killed. 90 minutes after the attacks begin, the phone finally rings. A formal request comes in from the Ministry of Home Affairs just before midnight. The Black Cats are at last operational. 200 NSG troops suit up and do weapons checks.
From the time the word go is given to the time you reach an aircraft, you should be there within half an hour. So within 70 minutes, you should get airborne.
Then they race to the airport. But they are based outside Delhi, over 1,000 kilometers from Mumbai. It's going to take 3 hours to get there. En route, they must start planning the operation. But they still don't know who they're up against, how they're armed, or what their aims are. At this point, their only source of information is the press.
Gunfire can be heard from inside the Taj Mahal Hotel. Another sign that the attackers were well armed and well prepared to launch what some here are calling India's 9/11.
By dawn, on Thursday the 27th of November, hundreds of journalists had arrived at the besieged Taj Palace and Oberoi hotels, where up to 830 guests are staying.
I remember the rope line coming up outside the Taj for the journalists. In hindsight, it wasn't very safe. It was not, the distance was not very far.
You know, some of the bullets, you know, sort of flew overhead. You know, so maybe we shouldn't have been there.
And we knew it was serious. The Taj was under siege. The other hotel, Oberoi, was under siege. People were trapped inside.
I think everyone was in shock. People didn't know what was going to happen next.
In the absence of any official government announcement, people begin speculating as to who is behind the attacks.
Originally, when we first reported the story on the very first day, the fact that there were multiple targets and multiple sites involved, these were all Al-Qaeda hallmarks.
All of a sudden, you had an attack by gunmen. We didn't know how many, how well armed they were. There was a strong suspicion, as there always are when there's an attack in India, that it was by Pakistanis, but we didn't have confirmation of that.
But whilst the Black Cats are in transit, there's a breakthrough. Indian intelligence intercepts cell phone conversations between the gunmen and their controllers. From this, they learn the controllers are based in Pakistan. Now they know who is behind the attacks and what their aims are.
This was an attack by LET, a Pakistani terrorist group also known by the name Lashkar-e-Taiba. And Their whole mission is to campaign for the Mujahideen in Afghanistan and also for the release of Muslims and to free Kashmir.
The region of Kashmir in the northwest of India also borders Pakistan, and its ownership has been heavily disputed by the two countries for over 60 years.
The general impression in the West was that the Lashkar-e-Taiba is a Kashmiri liberation organization. It is not. It's a Pakistani jihadi organization.
This militant organization had been involved in previous attacks on Indian soil, including train bombings and an attack on the Parliament building in Delhi.
An Islamist attack on India's parliament in 2001 left a dozen people dead and prompted India to send 1 million troops to the Pakistani border.
The Lashkar has three enemies: the Christians, the Jews, and the Hindus. It's also a philosophy that Al-Qaeda believes.
Now they know who's backing the attacks. The security forces know the terrorists' mission won't end in surrender.
They came to die, perhaps. And when you are in that state of mind, then it becomes a little tough to deal with the guy.
Just how fanatical the terrorists are is made clear by intercepted cell phone conversations between the terrorists and their Pakistani-based handlers, transcripts of which were later declassified.
Everything is being recorded by the media. Inflict the maximum damage. Keep fighting. Don't be taken alive. Kill all the hostages except the 2 Muslims. Keep your phone switched on so we can hear the gunfire. Kill them.
The gunmen at first were firing an incredible number of rounds, and they seemed to be very heavily armed. I heard the gunfire getting closer and closer and fully expected them to find me.
In the lobby of the Oberoi Hotel, guest Tim Reed watched as 9 staff and 3 guests are gunned down.
That was when I realized that something fairly bad was happening. And it was one of those occasions where everything moves in slow motion. I backed against the corridor looking for somewhere to hide. There really wasn't anywhere. There was a slight recess that I was able to hide in, but literally if I'd been any more than my 11 stone, my stomach would probably have been poking out from that.
Miraculously, the gunmen passed right in front of Tim.
At that point, they must have been, 5, 6, 7 feet from where I was, but they weren't looking for me, they were looking at the restaurant.
As 13 diners are being murdered in the restaurant, Tim makes a desperate break for it.
And I think of all the times in the whole incident, this is the only bit where I actively contributed. I was a participant who was in charge of what was happening. And there was a lift between myself and where the gunmen were. I was able to reach out and touch the call lift button. All those years on the Nintendo practicing with my rapid finger movements were put into action as I hit the closed door button about 2,000 times in quick succession. We pressed the lower lobby on the lift button, and then when the doors opened, we just ran. And I think that is really probably the abiding memory, the one that haunts me probably more than any other, because you're running and you just don't know what's behind you. When I ran out of the Oberoi Hotel onto the street, there were thousands of people panicking, running one way and then running again when the next grenade went off.
3.5 hours into the attacks, and chaos and confusion continue to grip the population of Mumbai. And the terrorists have one other target. This is the Chabad House, a Jewish community center and synagogue located in a 5-story building down a densely populated narrow street. It's home to American-born Rabbi Gavriel Holtzberg and his wife Rivka, who is 6 months pregnant. This Chabad house is one of 4,000 such houses in 73 countries, typically run by husband and wife couples. Opened in 2003, it largely catered for Israelis on their way to party hotspots, such as Goa and Rajasthan. but is open to anyone who wanted a place to pray, eat kosher food, or celebrate Jewish holidays. Information from the intercepted cell phone conversations prove it is seen as a key target by the controllers.
Every individual you kill there is like killing 50 elsewhere. Get rid of those people. Kill them. You never know. Firing may start and they may be left behind. By God's wish, it is all quiet. No movement here. No, don't fight.
The controllers urge the terrorists on to kill Jews.
Have you done the job or not? I will do it now in front of you. I was waiting for your call. Do it in the name of God. Do it in the name of God. You killed one? Both together.
Rabbi Holtzberg and his wife Rivka are murdered, along with their unborn child. 4 others are taken hostage.
They got Americans who also were Jews. So in one fell swoop, they sent a whammy of a message. They had even said later that an American Jew, or a Jew alone, was worth 50 of anybody else.
Meanwhile, across Mumbai, in the luxurious Taj Hotel, the terrorists can be heard enjoying themselves in the intercepted cell phone conversations.
Did you see the paintings on the wall? The bathrooms have gold taps. There are TVs with 13 screens.
Obviously, they were kind of overwhelmed by the luxury, and the Taj, of course, is really the epitome of luxury in terms of hotels in India.
It's ironic that human life was not considered valuable, but that wretched TV was.
The level of coordination is revealed as the controllers issue orders.
I can't see any flames on the television pictures. I said set fire to them.
Arriving in Mumbai at 5 a.m., 8 hours after the attacks began, J.K. Dutt and his senior Black Cat officers set up a command post and start planning their operation.
The government comes in to tell you what the task is. Thereafter, the place and time of the operation is decided by the force commander.
Dutt and his team quickly assess the situation. They know they are dealing with 3 locations: the 2 hotels and the Jewish Outreach Center.
The targets were split. And the main target, the Taj Hotel, was a huge, big area.
But they are hampered by a lack of information. There are no detailed floor plans of the hotels available, and no one even knows how many terrorists or hostages are still holed up in each location.
Mumbai was administratively in a state of paralysis for some time, and no information was provided to them actually of the target area. So they had to do a lot of guesswork and improvise, which took a huge amount of time.
What makes it worse is that their enemies clearly know the locations better than they do.
To my mind, somebody had wrecked the place. Taj Palace was a specific target. The Trident was a specific target. Shabbat House was a specific target.
The problems become clear when the Black Cats try to establish a perimeter around the target buildings. The locations have been well chosen. All are in heavily built-up areas.
Right in the center of Bombay, with roads, population, buildings, all sorts of things all over the place.
The Chabad House is in a narrow street. With one entrance, it is easy to defend and difficult for the Black Cats to storm without endangering the lives of the hostages.
You cannot go with all guns blazing in a scenario like this. No, certainly not. You can't use maximum force. It has to be precise force.
The hotels, on the other hand, have multiple entrances and exits.
Hotels are even more difficult to clear out because there are hundreds of rooms and you have to go from room to room to room.
Even worse, the eyes of the world are upon them. Orders are given to minimize collateral damage. And yet somehow, the Black Cats have to hunt down the terrorists. It's the second day of the Mumbai terror attacks. Pressure is now mounting on India's elite counter-terrorism unit, the Black Cats, to pounce.
The terrorists can definitely not win. Let's get that absolutely clear.
You've got to hit them hard and immediately, so that he knows that either he's going to be captured or he's going to die.
With the lives of hundreds of guests and hostages at stake, meticulous planning and preparation is vital.
I think it's very hard to imagine the kind of logistical challenges that were involved in locking down all of these sites.
In his final briefing to his officers, J.K. Dutt, the head of India's National Security Guard, has 4 key points. No loss of innocent life. Try and take the terrorists alive. Minimize collateral damage. And screen hostages to prevent terrorists slipping through the net. With the plans finalized, Black Cat commando squads are deployed to the Jewish Chabad house and the 2 5-star hotels. When completed in 1973, the Oberoi Trident Towers building was the tallest skyscraper in South Asia. At 116 meters with 35 floors above ground and 547 guest rooms, it is hugely popular with the world's business elite. Leaving the police and marine commandos guarding the perimeter, the Black Cats swing into action. And at 6:20 a.m., they enter the Oberoi Hotel. Operation Black Tornado is underway.
So the energy had to make its way through multiple rooms, multiple floors, like all 5-star hotels.
With no detailed plans of the hotel, they are forced to improvise.
It's a massive building, right? And whatever information they got of the hotel and its layout would be from the hotel staff.
The NSG use the service stairs and climb to the 21st floor.
We generally prefer to tackle a target from a higher to a lower ground.
Now they start a top-down sweep of the hotel. They move down through the building, clearing each floor as they go, gradually herding the terrorists into a corner. But it isn't easy.
You have to identify these people, otherwise you will end up killing some guests inside the hotel.
Armed with German Heckler & Koch MP5 submachine guns, the men begin the meticulous room-by-room search of the hotel. As guests are rescued, they're shepherded to safety outside. Transcripts from the intercepted cell phone conversations between the terrorists and their controllers reveal what happened. 8 hours after entering the hotel, at 2 p.m. on the 18th floor, the terrorists are finally cornered by the Black Cats.
The room is on fire. I'm in the bathroom. Try breaking out using a grenade. I've used up both grenades. Be brave. Don't be afraid. God and heaven are waiting for you. God willing.
We try and capture the terrorists alive if it is possible, so that you could get maximum information. But if it is not possible, so be it.
Part 1 of Operation Black Tornado to free the Oberoi Hotel is a success. Although 24 guests were murdered, both terrorists have been killed and 143 guests rescued. A mile away, across the city, the Black Cats are in a standoff with the terrorists at the Jewish Center. Having locked down the perimeters, they are unwilling to storm the building and endanger the lives of the hostages. They are further hampered by the media, who are inadvertently providing free intelligence to the gunmen.
What was very interesting about the way these attackers operated was the fact that they were monitoring the press.
It was all live. There was no time delay between what was being shown and what was being reported.
This meant the controllers were able to alert the terrorists to the helicopters buzzing the building. After carefully analyzing the intercepted traffic, intelligence agents believe all the hostages may have been executed. In the full glare of the cameras, they launch an aerial assault.
The people who organized this operation were watching those tapes and telling people inside on mobile phones that, look guys, there is a commando operation, aerial commando operation coming in.
At 7:30, NSG commandos fast rope from from an Indian Air Force helicopter onto the roof of the Chabad house. The assault is captured on the cell phone intercepts.
Firing has started. I think there is a helicopter on the roof. Take cover. Move now. Do it. Do it.
With suppressing fire from the terrorists and covering fire from snipers, they begin hunting down the terrorists.
They're firing into our roof. Peace be upon you. I have been hit. I have been hit. Pray for me. Where have you been hit? Where have you been hit? In my side and in my leg.
After a fierce gun battle, both terrorists lie dead. The Black Cats have scored another success. The terrorists in the Oberoi Hotel have been neutralized. So have the terrorists in the Jewish Chabad house. The Black Cats now face their greatest challenge: the imposing and iconic Taj Palace Hotel.
I think for Americans, the Taj Palace Hotel could be equivalent to the Park Plaza, the Waldorf Astoria.
Because there are hundreds of rooms, and you have to go from room to room, floor to floor. It's an enormous task.
Guests inside the hotel include VIPs and politicians. Their caliber and status compounding the difficulty of the operation. Not only are they potentially valuable hostages, they're amongst the world's elite. Any mistakes here will be hugely embarrassing.
What is important for the troops there is to make sure that whenever they use their weapon, they do use it properly, and that no collateral damage or no innocent civilian is killed.
In this kind of a scenario, killing a terrorist does not become a priority. Priority is to take the hostages out.
The NSG assess their options. They can't simply storm the hotel. They need a methodical approach. But for this, they need detailed floor plans. Yet once again, they don't have them.
The problem was that the NSG was not provided with any maps of the location, because apparently those maps are not available either with the hotel or the civil administration.
The only information the NSG could pick up were basic hotel room guides. They didn't show service lanes, passages, or corridors. However, the terrorists clearly knew the Taj Palace layout inside out.
I give full marks to the planners there sitting across the border.
They had this operation meticulously planned months in advance.
They say all warfare is based on deception, and they were completely, they surprised everybody.
The Black Cats realize the terrorists can use their superior knowledge of the Taj's layout to their advantage. By only operating from areas with multiple exits, they will be difficult to contain. So with the odds stacked against them, and not even knowing how many gunmen they are facing, the Black Cats prepare to move in.
Once they're given the word go, they don't look back, they don't say that I don't have intelligence. Whatever they have, you make do with that and you just get on with it.
Trying to locate the terrorists and free the hostages means breaking into and clearing all the rooms.
Every step was an obstacle for them. I know for a fact a lot of doors were jammed.
Therefore, you will have to prepare an explosive device to break open the entrance.
This is a painstaking process. It will take time to thoroughly check each area. And in a hotel with over 500 rooms, this could take days.
That had to be done very methodically and carefully, and that is why they took a lot of time.
To make matters worse, hotel guests have been told to lock themselves in their rooms. Most people are too scared to open their doors, terrified of who may be on the other side. As the Mumbai terror attacks move into their third day, the battle for the iconic Taj Palace Hotel is raging.
They came to cause maximum damage, and because it was a televised operation, the whole world is watching for 60 hours, they wanted to prolong it as long as possible.
India's elite Black Cat commandos are battling an unknown number of terrorists who are well armed and highly mobile.
Here was India sending in its top its top troops. And I suppose we thought it'd be over pretty quickly.
But with over 500 rooms to clear and hundreds of terrified guests hiding throughout the building, this cannot be a quick operation.
What we didn't know is when it would end. And by the time the siege went on and on and on, we realized this was getting very sticky.
Moving through the hotel, the Black Cats need to keep their tactics fluid and respond to situations as they arise.
When you're a soldier, you go into an operation, you will give your best for first 12 hours. After that, you'll start tiring out. But despite that, they went on, and I take my hat off to them, what they did. I think they were against all odds.
By midnight on the 28th of November, the Black Cats have been fighting for 30 hours. They have rescued over 200 guests and led them through the corridors to safe areas. Now, they can focus on the remaining terrorists.
We are going through the entire hotel, through the corridors, through the rooms, until we are able to check each and every room. I will not say that my operation is over.
With 90% of the hotel now cleared, the Black Cats believe they've cornered the remaining terrorists in one wing of the hotel. Heading up a staircase, contact is made. It's an ambush. They're caught in the crossfire. The Black Cats have a senior man killed, Major Sandeep Unikrishnan. Spurred on by his death, the Black Cats press on, forcing the terrorists to fall back. In the early hours of Saturday, the 29th of November, 56 hours after the terrorists enter the hotel, there are a series of loud explosions. But for the world's media assembled outside, it is unclear what is happening.
We were given briefings by the chief of the commandos.
When we first exchanged fire, we could have got those terrorists, but for trying to avoid the casualty of those civilians, we had to be that much more careful in our firing.
Information was very scanty. It was very sketchy because it was a siege situation. The commandos had gone in inside and there was a lot of fighting going on.
It was slightly strange. We were reporting on a battle which was going on in a building just a few hundred yards in front of us. We couldn't see the battle because it was all inside.
But one thing is clear. For the terrorists, every second on TV is a victory, as the intercepts show.
The atmosphere is good. After watching the TV reports, the whole city is feeling the destruction. More than 250 are injured across the city. You have worked well for God.
They came to cause maximum damage. And because it was a televised operation, whole world is watching for 60 hours. They wanted to prolong it as long as possible. So they had come for that.
Finally, after 2 straight days of fighting inside the hotel, the Black Cats have cleared entire floors and are pressing the terrorists hard.
Our commandos are so very well trained, there is no question of the terrorist escaping. So the problem is, find out where he is, spot him, and fix him.
By now, the Black Cats have also learned one critical piece of information from the intercepts. There are 4 terrorists in the hotel, and they're steadily eliminating them.
So people began to count, one more knocked out, one more knocked out. So the body count was being kept track of. That was a sign things were coming to an end.
By dawn, on the 29th of November, the siege is in its end game. There are just 2 terrorists left, and they are cornered on the first floor. In an intense exchange, the Black Cats fire a hail of bullets into the terrorists' position. Outgunned and outmaneuvered, the terrorists' deadly onslaught of murder and mayhem is finally over. After 3 days and the death of 170 innocent people, as well as the serious injury of 304 more, the city is left with terrible scars.
How dare somebody from across the border come right into the heart of the country and kill innocent people for what?
The killers who struck this week are brutal and violent, but terror will not have the final word. People of India are resilient. People of India are strong.
The comparisons to 9/11 are fair. I think they're valid. I think this is India's 9/11. I think if any good came of this, it's that India was forced to have a day of reckoning.
There are clearly lessons to be learned. The government took too long to react and called in the elite commandos far too late.
The energy apart, India as a whole learned a few lessons. One is that we must have a more decentralized system of dealing with terror attacks.
Since then, changes have been made to India's counter-terrorism plans.
Well, we are better prepared. Yes, we're better prepared than we were then. But I hope to God it's never tested.
Operation Black Tornado was a success for the Black Cats.
The NSG were really up against it. They were confronted with an enemy that had a number of hiding places, a lot of armory, and they did a great job to take them.
Even though they had minimal intelligence and faced a well-prepared enemy, they defeated the terrorists.
I remember seeing the NSG commandos in their sort of their black overalls, looking absolutely exhausted. You know, and I was in no doubt that these were some extremely motivated and brave men.
But about 100-odd men deployed, they knocked off 10 heavily armed terrorists. So the NSG's ratio of killing terrorists in such an operation, to my mind, would be perhaps one of the highest in the world.
It's a great organization. It has always come out, with flying colors in any operation they've been deployed.
And it is to their credit that they did this job with minimum number of casualties.
Operation Black Tornado shows terrorists and the world just what the Black Cats are capable of and the lengths they'll go to get the job done. Heavily armed Islamist terrorists seize a theatre and over 800 innocent civilians. Demands are made. Hostages are lined up for execution. The clock starts ticking.
It's an absolute nightmare situation from the point of view of the security forces.
Only the elite Special Ops Force Spetsnaz Group Alpha has a chance to defeat them. It's a race against time as deadlines approach.
You gotta have people willing to go there. That's the difference between a soldier and a specialist.
There's no obvious way of preventing the murder of hundreds. Only one very long shot. A secret Russian technology that's never been tried before stands a chance of saving them. Now on Black Ops, we go behind the scenes on one of the most unbelievably risky hostage rescues in modern times.
It's not a movie, it's not a reality show. It's reality, and reality is very unpredictable.
The crisis starts on an ordinary evening in an ordinary suburb of Russia's capital city, Moscow. It's a wet autumn night, And for 800 Russians, a time with friends and family at a popular musical is a welcome prospect to cheer up a dreary weekday evening.
10 лет назад
Almost by accident we got to see the musical. We didn't plan to. The weather on this day was terrible. It was a very grey day. My granddaughter was very young at the time. She felt really nervous, as if something bad was going to happen. She was really crying and she wouldn't let us go.
Tickets are sold out at the popular venue, a huge Soviet-era building that had been converted into an arts centre, a place of peaceful, civilized recreation.
In some ways, what was particularly striking about it was that it was not striking. It was not a particular high-prestige target.
This is the theatre's actual recording of that fateful night's performance of a romantic comedy set in the 1950s, with a plot featuring cheerful Russian soldiers. Just a block away, 4 vans with a force of 40 heavily armed Chechen terrorists are closing on the theatre fast.
нам понравилось. Мы посидели в буфете.
We were enjoying it. After the interval, we went back to the second half, and there was dancing. And that's when the siege started.
Захват.
Now the extremists burst into the theatre, rake the foyer with gunfire, and spread through the building fast. They're suicide bombers, who for years have been at war with Russia. Islamist jihadis from a breakaway republic who'll stop at nothing to get their way. Now they've brought their campaign of terror into the midst of Russia's civilians. The theatre's recording reveals the moments the terrorists take over the building as they seal it off from the outside world.
После антракта началось действие.
People in military uniform walked around the auditorium and down the aisles, and at first I thought it was part of the play.
Артисты, ребята тоже не поняли. Вот когда Марат спрыгнул.
One of the actors was made to sit next to me after the Chechens had stormed the stage, and I whispered, "That's an amazing piece of theater."
Slowly the audience realizes that the game has changed. The terror has started, and they're now hostages.
Then I saw some of the soldiers hit people with rifle butts, and I realized that it was serious.
And he replied, "That's not part of the play. This is for real." It was then that I realized what danger we were in.
Now the terrorists are in control, and the siege has begun. The theatre couldn't be better designed as a place to hold hostages. The auditorium is a perfect prison, with few exits that are easy to guard. Every one of the terrorists are radical extremists, committed to die for their cause, pitiless and determined.
The unique feature of a terrorist threat is that you can never predict how serious their plans are, if they're just bluffing or if they are really ready to sacrifice themselves. We were inclined to think that they were not joking.
With alarm bells ringing in every security department in Moscow, the worst possible scenario is now a reality.
It was an absolute nightmare situation from the point of view of the security forces. It really is the last thing they wanted. They knew from past experience that the Chechen terrorists would be, if necessary, willing to blow themselves up. Amongst the terrorists, there would be people who had had experience fighting during the guerrilla war, and therefore, they knew how to use their weapons. They were unlikely to listen to humanitarian appeals.
It looks like a no-win situation for Russia's authorities. Their only hope? Spetsnaz Group Alpha, an anti-terror unit the envy of the world. Soldiers built to take on terrorists, hardened by years of confronting Chechen attackers. But even for them, a mass suicide bomb attack and 850 hostages is an almost impossible challenge. Within minutes, the elite of Russia's anti-terror strategists are scrambled. It's clear that conventional tactics won't work. Their solution? A secret gas technology unknown outside Russia. But there's a problem. It's completely untried. If it succeeds, it'll beat the terrorists. If it fails, the consequences are unthinkable. Orders from the Kremlin summon every fighting man in the city, and Moscow's barracks are emptied as hundreds descend on the theatre. The Chechen terrorists have some new techniques of their own to add to their advantage. Never seen before, female suicide bombers, the so-called Black Widows, women who've lost their loved ones and are willing to die for their cause. At a single command, they'll detonate their bomb belts and trigger a series of massive explosions that will demolish the theatre, killing everyone. This is payback for years of suffering in a conflict with Russia that seems impossible to resolve peacefully.
A lot of people passionately hate the Russian government and project their hate on all Russians. When your family's been destroyed, you would never go for peace talks, at least until you get some revenge. The government spawned a huge number of sworn enemies, and the Black Widows, who appeared on the TV for the first time, were a variation of such sworn enemies.
The Chechens make sure the Black Widows are constantly on display.
They appeared in absolutely all footage, in journalistic as well as that made by terrorists themselves. All of them were dressed in black and were wearing suicide bombers' belts. Their main task was to show that they were ready for everything.
The Black Widows are not just a propaganda tool, they're also deadly serious. They've come to Moscow for one purpose only.
Все понимали, что это не какая-то опереточная такая вот инсценировка.
Everyone understood that this was not an act. Everyone knew that these women, if they called themselves Black Widows, were ready to blow themselves up.
Террористов на то, что они могут.
Finally, there are two massive bombs, each too heavy for a single person to lift, placed among the hostages at the center of the auditorium, their hair trigger detonator at the fingertip of a Black Widow. The Chechens' terror tactics are well known to Russia's authorities. They're experts at capturing big public buildings and holding large groups hostage. Hospitals and schools have been targets in the past. Now a theatre gives them the perfect platform to get the world's attention.
The main danger was obvious. A very powerful bomb in the auditorium with suicide bombers. I knew Alpha had very little time for an assault and only a very slim chance to destroy the terrorists before they detonated their infernal machine. I'd never known a situation where people were grouped around a giant bomb that could be detonated in 1 second.
Group Alpha have to weigh up the risks very carefully. Their expertise is all about speed in an assault situation. For years, their adversaries, the Chechens, have had to devise a solution to the Spetsnaz' incredible discipline and aggression. Now they think they've cracked it and have Alpha in the ultimate stranglehold.
It's not as easy as kicking in the door and shooting someone between the eyes. Not when you have 40 people willing and able to shoot back, and some of them willing and able to blow themselves up, along with 1,000 hostages. So the equation is very different from a video game or TV show or a movie. The cost is very different, the consequences, the possibilities are very different.
And any hope of a peaceful resolution is very small. The Chechens can only be pacified by the impossible, the withdrawal of Russian troops from their homeland.
The terrorist agenda was straightforward, if ridiculously unrealistic. They wanted basically the Russians to pull out of Chechnya. They wanted an end to the war, and they wanted victory. They were not necessarily stupid. They had, I think, no real expectation that this was going to happen. This was, frankly, a terror raid rather than a carefully planned political act.
Only one group has a chance of taking them out without setting off the bombs: the elite Spetsnaz Group Alpha. Among the most experienced and successful anti-terrorist special forces in the world, Group Alpha are Russia's Navy SEALs. Their headquarters, Moscow. The Chechens have brought their war to the home city of Russia's hardest men.
A massive group of people take over in the heart of Moscow, in the heart of Russia. I couldn't believe it, how 30 people got in and managed to take so many people hostage. When I got the call, it was very brief. It's an emergency.
Alpha was formed in the 1970s and has evolved constantly since. During the Cold War, the Soviet Union needed ruthless killers more than battlefield heroes, people who could start revolutions and kill heads of state without anyone knowing who was behind it. That meant lightning speed, total stealth, and clinical precision.
These are not negotiators. These are not people who are there to rescue hostages, first and foremost. These are people who go in because they have people to kill.
Alpha training is the toughest in the world, with levels of brutality and extreme personal endurance that in many armed forces would be illegal.
They go through a sort of phenomenally brutal training regime, which culminates in sort of a 12-minute period where they have to take on 12 experienced special forces in hand-to-hand combat. And all they have to do is just basically stay standing at the end of that 12 minutes. But even so, a lot of them never get through that.
You cannot just wish for it. You have to learn it, you have to ingrain it in people, and there is a method to that madness.
But Alpha operatives are trained not just to be physically tough, but to be extremely mentally capable as well.
Training is the most important part, not the hardware, the toys, the technical implements. You become a thinking fighter, thinking operator, versus someone who follows the script.
The glory days of Russia's special forces were Afghanistan in the 1970s and 80s. They were sent to Kabul to kill the Afghan president, and in the raid lost only 2 men. But after the Cold War, Russia's biggest problem was terrorism, and it was Alpha that answered the call. They are among the world's great experts in dealing with hostage-taking and specialize in extracting people from a massive range of different environments.
If you were an Alpha officer specializing in storming airplanes, you would train all day long to storm the plane blindfolded. You'd know where every rivet is. You'd know how to open the aisle cover, how to penetrate the plane through the service doors, and so on.
But there's another reason why the Moscow theater siege mission is special. Alpha's reputation has been tarnished after being drawn into Russia's unstable internal politics. The unit's reputation reached the ultimate low in 1991, when it was ordered to crush popular support for the government and back a coup by hardline communists.
There have always been hard times, especially in those moments when we realized that our division was being misused. Our primary objective is fighting terrorists, the homeland enemies, and we have always perceived and still perceive internal conflicts with suspicion.
The attempted coup turned Alpha from the heroes of Afghanistan into the attack dogs of Russia's secret police.
It all came as a real shock. All the officers had a very hard time. We were not prepared to fight our own people. We all saw ourselves as an elite unit whose mission was to save people. And we were seeing through our helmet visor people just like our mothers, sisters, brothers. We had no desire to use special techniques on our own people. Naturally, this affected the combatability. It is one thing to fight your enemy, and another thing, your own people.
Now, 11 years later, Spetsnaz Group Alpha have their chance to assert their integrity as defenders of their nation by taking on its most deadly enemy in the heart of the country. But it's a chance that comes at a price. It will be the toughest test ever of their formidable skills. Alpha's elite planners know they have a challenge from the Chechen terrorists that is uniquely tailored to stop even the fastest assault. The weapons that usually guarantee success, speed and aggression, can't work in this situation. So careful planning, calculation and timing are crucial to give Alpha every chance of success.
They had to act fast, but on the other hand, they had to prepare as much as possible. They had to try and scope out the area. They had everything from listening devices to using fiber optic vision devices to try and see what was going on. They had to run a few mock-up operations just so that their special forces had a sense of where they were going and where the targets were. So it's this balance. On the one hand, you don't want to leave it too long so that something bad happens, but on the other hand, you don't want to rush it.
But even with the best planning and timing, Alpha is outmaneuvered by the simple fact that suicide bombers only need to press a trigger to inflict mass casualties. Stopping that is beyond conventional tactics. Moscow has been on high alert for a major terrorist incident for over a year since 9/11. Already this year there have been attacks on subways and residential properties. Now the city is facing a crisis on an unprecedented scale.
This wasn't a standard situation. In the history of the special forces, this was a first in Moscow.
Alpha are specialist siege commandos. This is what they train for night and day. The challenge of the suicide bombers' belts is big enough. Each might kill 30 or 40 people. But the giant bombs are powerful enough to kill everyone in the auditorium, all 850. It's clear that Alpha's planners have to come up with a radically new solution that will give their men the edge. For the hostages surrounded by suicide bombers vowing to die, an assault by special forces is a terrifying thought. Calling their families and the media, they do everything they can to stop Alpha from attacking.
They were making phone calls saying, please don't let them storm the theater, please negotiate peacefully and carefully, and maybe you'll be able to find a peaceful solution.
To increase the pressure on Russia's authorities, the terrorists have been releasing footage of the hostages, and they're careful to avoid revealing anything that might be useful to attackers. Then they make their first mistake. As an act of mercy, they release some vulnerable hostages, children and sick people. With careful questioning, Alpha's intelligence officers are able to get the first bits of information about the situation inside the theater that the Chechens don't want known. The total numbers of terrorists, the positions of snipers and ammunition stores. Then, 6 hours into the siege, a completely unpredictable element enters the equation. A truly bizarre event takes place. As unseen by the security guards around the theater, a young woman walks right off the street and into the theater. No one knows who she is or why she's there. She goes into the auditorium and shouts at the audience, telling them to rise up against the Chechens. And then she starts at the gunman.
She passed through the aisle screaming, "What have you done? You should release all the people." She was saying, "I'm going to call the police." Maybe she was drunk. The Chechen said she was a KGB agent pretending to be a drunk woman.
The Chechens show just what they do with anyone who won't take them seriously. The woman was a 26-year-old local shop assistant, Olga Romanova, with no connection to the hostages or the theatre.
Что-то изменилось. После того, как они начали стрелять, конечно, изменилось.
After the incident with Olga, just after it happened, the whole mood among the audience and terrorists changed. From then on, there was a different atmosphere, and everyone understood that this was something that might happen again. It was much more serious.
Они тоже.
All the time, as the world looks on in horror, Alpha Intelligence is building up a detailed picture of the situation inside the theatre and the weaknesses of the terrorists. Mobile phone conversations between the hostages and their families now reveal a much more serious situation. The terrorists have not only wired the auditorium to kill all the hostages, but wired the whole building and packed it with bombs.
Были силовики, которые
The security people were 100% convinced the bombs were real and would be detonated. This put the special forces in a position where they knew they would almost certainly be killed along with 90% of the hostages. So they were looking for whatever advantage they could get. That meant they were ruling out nothing, and I mean absolutely nothing.
48 hours into the siege, and the terrorists decide to turn up the heat. The Chechen commander, Movsa Barayev, announces he's going to start executions at midnight. One killing every hour until his demands are met. The victims are selected by Barayev himself.
There was a decision to shoot 10 people on either the 4th or 5th row, and just after this information started to spread around the hostages, one of the Chechens came and sat down at the end of the 5th row, wearing a mask, and everyone now expected that at any minute something would happen to the people in the 5th row.
Now the Russian authorities face a dilemma. Either Alpha goes in and triggers an explosion with mass casualties, or the world watches helpless as the Chechens start killing innocent men, women, and children, one by one, hour by hour. Alpha's strategists now have to go for their most radical solution, a long shot, so risky it would normally be dismissed as impossible. But this is an impossible situation. For years, Russian military scientists have been working on a secret formula for a knockout gas that will stop any aggressor in his tracks. Even today, its exact composition is a state secret, and scientists outside Russia can only guess what it really was.
As far as we can ascertain, the agent that was used in the theatre siege was a derivative of an opiate called fentanyl. Opiates are very potent and they depress your breathing. They're normally used in operating theatres, but what they wanted was something that would act very quickly, knock people out, that could be delivered in the air. So this is why they probably chose fentanyl.
In complete secrecy, Russia's military scientists have figured a way to multiply the strength of a powerful medical anesthetic by a factor of several thousand. If this top-secret, untried chemical can somehow be piped into the theatre without anyone noticing, it might just sedate the terrorists enough to stop them from detonating their bombs and give Alpha a chance of taking them out in an assault. It sounds like something out of science fiction, but it's about to get the green light from President Putin himself.
This is absolutely a one-off. Sometimes gases from knockout to tear gas have been used, but never has it been used on this scale, in these kind of concentrations, to flood an entire area with knockout gas.
Они исходили совершенно из такого арифметического.
Their logic was that if 90% of the hostages would die anyway, and if this gas could help save at least a few, then it should be applied.
Хоть какое-то количество, значит, его можно применять.
But even if they use the gas, there's a problem. the Chechen leader Movsa Barayev is going to start executions at midnight. That's just 2 hours away. To get the gas equipment inside the building and then fill it up so it knocks people out is going to take far longer. Even with the secret weapon, it looks like there's no way of stopping the executions of innocent civilians. Outside the theatre, special forces units from all over Moscow gather knowing they face a formidable enemy who make up in determination what they lack in skill.
The Chechens were an interesting mix. They ranged the whole gamut from people who were really experienced fighters who had done the national service in Soviet times, then they had actually gone on to become anti-Soviet rebels and had fought through the last decade or so of civil war and insurgency within Russia. They therefore knew the tradecraft of how to fight, and they also had a degree of discipline and esprit de corps.
And the terrible destruction brought by war in their homeland means that they will stop at nothing to get even with the Russian authorities.
They were, on the whole, motivated by loss, by anger. There are a certain number who were, for example, members of their own family had been killed. In some cases, they had been arrested by the authorities and then were never seen again or turned up in some ditch. So they didn't necessarily have the same skill, but by God, they certainly had commitment and determination to eventually pay the Russians back for what had happened.
It isn't long before the gunmen get a chance to demonstrate once again how ready they are to kill innocent civilians as an anxious relative decides to take matters into his own hands. A middle-aged man, Gennady Vlach, strides into the theatre and demands that the Chechens release his son. And the Chechens waste no time in deciding how to respond. Any doubts that the terrorists mean business and have no difficulties killing Russians whenever it suits them have now been completely discarded. Alpha's strategists have hours to get the gas working if they're to prevent the start of executions. The trouble is, that simply isn't possible. And there's another factor ramping up the time pressure. Days without sleep and massive stress means both hostages and captors are getting jumpy.
The sense is that just one individual can do something silly, or else just bad luck. For example, let's say some of the hostages try to take matters into their own hands and it could lead to a massive explosion.
The most important thing they're all afraid of was the psychological fatigue of the terrorists. So everyone was aware that there was a time limit.
Alpha badly need two things: more time and anything that will calm the situation down. Then an hour before the deadline, the unexpected once again changes the game. Movsa Barayev, the Chechen leader, gets a phone call from Moscow's special envoy to Chechnya, General Viktor Kazantsev. He offers to fly to Moscow and negotiate face-to-face with the terrorists, with the full authority of the president, Vladimir Putin, behind him. There's one condition: no executions. The Chechens buy it.
И вот прибежал Бараев, довольный, все, говорит, нормально, они, значит...
Barayev came in looking happy, saying tomorrow Kazantsev is flying back to Moscow. And at that point, the mood lifted. The Black Widows came across as much more upbeat and started telling us, you see, our Barayev gets things done better than your Putin.
For the Chechens, this seems a major strategic breakthrough, and they're overjoyed. This is the actual wiretapped conversation between Kazantsev and Barayev, cutting a deal to delay the executions. The terrorists' plan seems to be working. Until now, they've been ignored, outlaws from a forgotten conflict. Now, the president's man is coming to plead with them in the heart of the Russian capital.
It was undoubtedly a delaying tactic. One thing that the authorities knew is that they needed time. They needed time to dig out the blueprints of the theatre and train their operations forces to make an assault. They needed time to decide just quite what they were going to do.
Meanwhile, Alpha uses the precious time bought by the negotiators to maximum effect. Through the night, deep beneath the theatre, working in total silence and with utmost care, engineers secure canisters of the knockout gas in strategic parts of the theatre's air conditioning. The time for it to be released has arrived. Gradually, it starts to filter into the auditorium to do its work. Aware that something is happening, the Chechen gunmen run from the auditorium and leave the Black Widows at their posts. But rather than set off the bombs, the gunmen seem to want to prolong the siege and run to the defense of the building, determined to take on their old adversaries, the Spetsnaz, in combat. But there isn't anyone to fight. Alpha Group still has to hold back. If just one Black Widow is conscious, the whole theatre could still blow. And every minute that the auditorium fills with the powerful agent, the danger to the hostages increases.
One of the problems is where you release the agent, so you have to use air vents. And you've got to ensure that the agent you release will knock everybody out quickly. So this means that you have to pump in huge quantities to reach the people at the far end of the theatre. And in pumping in large amounts, what you're going to end up doing is giving some people at the far end of the theatre enough to knock them out. But the people close to the vent are going to get many times the lethal dose of an agent.
Soon after the release of the gas, the first signs of its effects emerge. Semi-drugged hostages manage to escape the auditorium. It's clear the terrorists are no longer in control. Now is the time to strike. The waiting's over. The word comes from Strategic Command to go.
When the officers received the order to enter the building and destroy the terrorists, all of them were 100% certain that in the event of an explosion, no one would come back alive.
Такого не получится.
It's our job. If you're going to think about the mission too much and what will go wrong, it's not going to help. You go into zombie mode, autopilot, to fulfill the mission. It may seem cold, but it is necessary.
Taking out as many Chechens as possible before the order to detonate is now the top priority. Alpha's legendary speed cuts down the gunman in seconds.
It would have been good to take some terrorists alive to question them. But when you're there, in that situation, you have weapons, they have weapons, and you need to fire before they do. It's a quick decision.
And in the auditorium, Alpha kill every Black Widow without a second's pause. Some die before they can detonate their bomb belts. Others press the triggers, only for the belts to fail. But the theatre could still blow at any moment because there's still one person who can inflict mass casualties. Now seconds count in the hunt to stop the Chechen leader, Movsa Barayev.
We were expecting Barayev to be in the auditorium with the bombs, and he wasn't.
Movsa Barayev is loose in the building. Now Spetsnaz have to find him and stop him before he puts into action the terrorists' ultimate sanction, detonation of the bombs. Eventually, he's traced to a storeroom behind the theatre's cafeteria.
Once the officers of Alpha came in, after just a minute and a half, all the terrorists were shot down, and none of them managed to trigger a single bomb. The whole operation was not more than 10 minutes in duration. The shooting itself can be counted in just a few minutes.
Alpha's lightning speed prevents the explosions and stops the crisis in its tracks. It is without doubt one of the most successful Alpha operations ever undertaken. Not a single operative or hostage is harmed, and all the enemy are taken out.
Ну, первое то, что я подумал, что слава богу, что не сработало взрывное.
I remember that I thought, thank God the bombs did not go off. I can imagine if the bombs had exploded, no one would have survived.
Никого бы, наверное, не осталось.
The first hostages are pulled to safety as the whole world watches the extraordinary success of the elite force after 3 days of agony. It looks like Alpha's reputation has risen from the ashes. But any hope that the mission's over is quickly dashed. For even from beyond the grave, the Chechens have another surprise for the Russians they hate so much. Intelligence reports suggest that there are hidden bombs around the theatre on timers that are impossible to find and defuse in time. If this intelligence is true, the theatre could still blow at any moment. They have to get the hostages out fast. With extraordinary haste verging on panic, rescue teams sweep into the building. Their task? To haul out the unconscious hostages in a race against time with an unknown number of ticking bombs beneath them. But in a siege beset by surprises and unexpected twists, the greatest of all is about to unfold in front of the world's TV cameras.
The Dubrovka operation should be divided into 2 major phases. One which involved Alpha units who did their job, and another one that happened afterwards.
As phase 1 of the military operation is completed, the job is now to get the hostages out of the theatre.
Alpha were not essentially tasked with getting the hostages out. There were too few of them, and that's not really what they're about. That would have been the role of other elements within the fire service, within the ambulance corps or whatever. And this is really where the operation fell apart.
Alpha's done a brilliant job. A textbook operation that couldn't have been bettered by any special forces team anywhere. But the hostages aren't out of danger, and the mission is about to enter its darkest phase yet.
When the first media reports about the completion of the operation and the freeing of the hostages started coming in, of course we were all euphoric, including myself. We saw dead black widows, and there was no information on our losses.
And then the stark reality starts to emerge.
Sometime after, we saw and got the reports that the operation went well. There was no explosion, people were reported alive. And then the tragedy came. Every hour, updates began to come of 10, 20, 30, 40 people dead. Everyone was stunned.
Hostages that look as if they're unconscious from the gas are in fact dying, and it's due to the same technology used to rescue them.
Some of the police officers that carried people out, they had no idea about the recovery position for people that have a severe respiratory depression, so they just laid them on their backs, and people suffocated. Instead of putting them on the recovery positions on the side where the tongue would relax and they would be able to breathe until the antidote was administered.
The brilliance of Alpha's military operation is now being catastrophically let down by a civilian evacuation wreaking more havoc in minutes than the Chechens have done in the previous 3 days.
If you were going to do something like this thoroughly, you would want everybody primed, and for some reason that didn't happen. The people who needed to help with the cleanup and the protection of individuals who were affected just didn't know what to do.
Without realizing the terrible damage they're doing, paramedics and police are carrying out drugged hostages with their heads at dangerous angles, lying unconscious faces exposed upwards to the elements. Completely helpless, hostages are suffocating, choking on their own vomit or gagging to death on their tongues.
It was quite clear that the way people were brought out and just dumped when they came out of the theatre, that no thought had been given to the fact that people's breathing might have been compromised. So there was very little coordination.
A lot of people who were involved from the medical perspective hadn't been told that it was fentanyl that was used, so they didn't even know how to treat the individuals concerned. And therefore there was this awful vacuum. And that's frankly where so many of the hostages died, or why so many of the hostages died, is because at that moment where you needed to have a seamless handover from, as it were, the killers to the savers, there was in fact a moment of uncertainty, a moment of insecurity, and also again a very classic moment of where, in Russian terms, security took precedence. That until people were absolutely certain that there were, for example, no terrorists amongst the hostages, none of the hostages could be removed, because you had to make sure you got all the terrorists.
And it's not only that the evacuation teams aren't organised to deal with drugged hostages, they haven't even prepared enough supplies for the hundreds who need treatment. An antidote to the gas exists, but is only available in tiny quantities with a handful of people qualified to administer it. In the hours and days that follow the siege, the city's hospitals struggle to cope, and the death toll steadily climbs.
People simply didn't know what to do. They didn't imagine the scale of what needed to be done. And as a result of that, some of the hostages that could have been saved were not saved. You know, it's very unfortunate, it's very sad, but sometimes it's the fact of war. You know, things do not go perfect. Things don't go perfect. We wish they did, you know, yeah. Every operator in every military, especially a tier 1 operator, what is his wish in a situation like that? Of course, to save every hostage. Okay. Does it work that way every single time? Again, it's not a movie, it's not a reality show. It's reality, and reality is very unpredictable.
In all, 133 people die in the 2002 Dubrovka theatre siege. Only 3 at the hands of the terrorists. Nearly all the fatalities are caused by the gas used to rescue them, either overdoses or because the unconscious are mishandled.
I think everybody understands that although 133 people died, in the circumstances it could have been 1,000. The full scale of the tragedy could have been very different. I was miserable. It was a real tragedy.
Because of the tragedy, the Alpha teams involved don't call the operation a success.
The only success was the killing of the terrorists, and that the majority of people were still alive. But generally it was not a success, because more than 100 people died. It's not that we didn't work hard enough. It wasn't because of bad planning. It wasn't Alpha's fault. We don't feel proud of what we did because it's our job.
The deaths become all the more poignant when it's revealed that the giant bombs in the theatre were fakes all along. And some of the Black Widow's belts were duds. Even though Alpha themselves were unaware of this at the time, it leaves the impression that the use of the gas and the deaths that it caused had all been for nothing. Media observers start talking about the operation as a tragedy.
So 130-some hostages dying is a tragedy? Absolutely. Huge tragedy to every single family that lost loved one. It would have been a little bit bigger tragedy, thousands of them dying in few huge explosions. And in the long run, it would have been even bigger tragedy if a state, a country, succumbs to the demands, and people like that, capable to do something like that, achieve what they want to achieve.
The irony is plain to all, that the expertise of the military is only mirrored by the failures of the civilian rescue effort. In the years that follow the Dubrovka theatre siege, the families of the hostages who died, and many hostages themselves, campaign for compensation and continue trying to get justice. The precise details of the gas used have never been revealed, despite repeated requests from doctors treating survivors. But Alpha's achievement remains unblemished by the siege.
It didn't really tarnish the reputations of the special forces themselves. It instead was regarded as it were, that the fighting men did their job. It was the Kremlin, it was the administration, it was everyone else who in effect let them down.
Today, in the eyes of most Russians, Spetsnaz Group Alpha are the heroes of the Dubrovka theatre siege.
For the kind of liberal, anti-government protesters who are marching in the streets of Moscow, it shows how the Kremlin is brutal, heavy-handed, doesn't mind letting people die as long as it kills its enemies. To be honest, though, for the majority of Russians, actually what Dubrovka says is that Russia is still strong and determined, and if you mess with Russia, then you can expect a devastating response.
The extraordinary achievement of Spetsnaz Group Alpha at Dubrovka stands unchallenged as one of the most daring and technically brilliant operations ever undertaken to break a siege in counter-terrorism. Among the world's special forces, Spetsnaz Group Alpha enjoy an outstanding reputation. Both the Soviet legacy and Russia's unique approach to counter-terrorism have created a specialist force unlike any other, an asset appreciated both domestically and internationally.
Alpha remains today the preeminent Russian Special Forces unit, beyond any shadow of a doubt. They really are pretty much at the absolute top tier of the sort of the world Special Forces rankings, particularly when it comes to individual personal combat skills. Shooting, killing people with their bare hands, that kind of thing, they really are at the top. And just in terms of pure individual physical toughness as well.
Alpha's fight to assert its integrity after years of political interference has triumphed. Once again, it's proved itself the defender of the Russian people. He's the most wanted terrorist in the world. After almost a decade, US intelligence has finally tracked Osama bin Laden down to a compound in Pakistan. SEAL Team 6, a US elite special forces unit, is tasked with the now historic capture or kill mission.
They had been waiting for this call for years.
This is the inside account of one of the most famous Black Op missions of all times.
It gets more excitement in the air, and everybody starts getting a lot more serious. Board the helos, we're definitely going now. We're going in, it's going in at night.
How SEAL Team 6 planned this high-risk raid, and how it almost failed. Now on Black Ops, taking down bin Laden. Operation Neptune Spear. 2 Black Hawk helicopters carrying a team of US Navy SEALs are approaching a compound in Abbottabad, Pakistan. They believe Osama bin Laden is hiding there. But then, disaster.
It's rare an op ever goes like it's planned. There's always something that comes up without expecting it.
One of the helicopters hits a sudden draft, causing it to hit the compound wall and crash land.
The town's awake, and so they're thinking any minute now we can be run down with a lot of enemy forces coming at us.
The SEALs have lost the element of surprise. Every second is now critical. The Special Forces team must quickly adapt and respond to the changed situation.
What you're expected to do is make a determination whether the occupants are a threat or not a threat.
They blow their way into the compound.
And you have to react in an instant. If they're a threat, then you engage.
This elite unit has trained for every scenario. This is the last chapter in the hunt to bring bin Laden to justice, a hunt which began more than a decade earlier. On 9/11/2001, the US endures the worst attacks on its soil in modern history. Almost 3,000 people are dead. President Bush vows to hunt down Osama bin Laden, Al-Qaeda's leader and the mastermind of the attacks, and bring him to justice.
There's an old poster out west, as I recall, that said, "Wanted, dead or alive."
In December 2001, US forces chased bin Laden to the caves of Tora Bora in Afghanistan, but he manages to slip away.
We were always on the hunt. We were using every form of intelligence gathering, whether it was human intelligence, signals intelligence.
For the next 10 years, bin Laden manages to elude US forces.
We still haven't killed or captured Osama bin Laden and his terrorist cadre. Do you happen to know where he is?
He may be dead, he may be seriously wounded, he may be in Afghanistan, he may be somewhere else.
Bin Laden learns very early on that he can't trust anything electronic. He almost dies in Tora Bora in the mountains of Afghanistan from using cell phones. And so one of the first things he does is basically gets rid of anything electronic that could be traced back to him.
Minimizing the use of communication technology allows Al-Qaeda's leader and his close deputies to operate under the radar.
We saw his name crop up so little because very little communication. I think very few people in the organization knew where he was.
Bin Laden seems to have disappeared off the face of the earth. The only clues come from videotapes he releases, taunting the US.
You were looking at things as simple as the foliage and the light and the terrain to try and figure out where it may have been taped. We looked at his health. Did he use particular words? Was it possible that what looked like just a sort of message to followers might have had some embedded message?
Bin Laden has found a way to still control the organization.
He basically becomes reliant on a series of individuals, couriers in particular, who bring him information, be it the latest battle reports. They then in turn take his directives back out to his lieutenants in this way. Over the decade, the US does make some progress. Senior Al-Qaeda figures are captured and interrogated.
The importance of getting the big players in the organization, the archetypal plotters in the Al-Qaeda organization, was partly trying to learn locational information. Where is the man? So the first question you might ask him might be things like, where's bin Laden?
Despite these successes, public enemy number one remains at large. By the time President Obama takes office in 2009, most people believe he'll never be caught.
There are fewer and fewer sightings of him. Bin Laden is making fewer videos, although still some. And when he does make a video, there's a spike in interest, of course, within the government.
But at the CIA, some analysts are still looking for new clues.
The bits and pieces are things like talking to detainees. How does the network operate? Watching them move.
Case officers suggest studying the structure of Al-Qaeda's network. Who does bin Laden use to pass messages, allowing him to remain undetected? The analysts believe the answer to this question will lead them back to bin Laden.
Somebody says something here, somebody says something there. Over the course of years, you accumulate those grains and slowly a picture comes into focus.
After years of frustration, the analysts believe they've got something.
When we started looking at terrorist organizations, and if you look at them historically, they're not Western hierarchies. When you sit at the threat table, for example, you're talking about a facilitator here, a fundraiser there. The organization itself, as you go up to the top, they don't always talk to each other. It's very diffuse. It's more like fabric than a hierarchy.
They knew there was probably a courier out there, and it was from some of these initial interrogations at Guantanamo Bay and other prisons that they learned of one courier in particular.
Al-Qaeda's detainees reveal the courier bin Laden trusts is someone who's known as al-Kuwaiti, the man from Kuwait. Digging deeper, they find his real name, Saeed Ahmed. If they find him, they may be able to find his boss.
Through intercepts of his cell phones as he traveled throughout the Gulf and Pakistan, they figured out that he seemed to still be in touch with the highest ranks of al-Qaeda, and they started tracking him on the ground in Pakistan.
As they track him, CIA operatives notice a highly suspicious pattern to al-Kuwaiti's behavior.
They found this very strange thing he would do was to turn off his cell phone and then drop off the map for a while. Things that made the Americans think, this is the kind of extraordinary measure that the most hunted terrorist in the world might take. Let's follow this guy.
The breakthrough comes when the agents manage to follow the courier's car. To their amazement, it is headed towards a residential compound in the outskirts of Abbottabad, a Pakistani army town about an hour-and-a-half drive from the capital, Islamabad.
It's the home of Pakistani's West Point, one of its top military academies. It's a garrison town.
The CIA starts watching the compound. Surveillance reveals that al-Kuwaiti, the courier, lives there with his brother and their families. But they are not alone. Hidden behind unusually high walls, there are other residents, perhaps even another family, living on the top floor of one of the buildings.
Once they had a place to focus on, you can bring kind of the full technological weight on this compound. And so there was really no expense spared. Satellites were shifted. You're basically using every technological mean, every covert mean on the ground.
Initial analysis of the surveillance reports is encouraging.
They still don't know who's in the compound, of course, in Abbottabad, but they suspect it's somebody quite senior, either in al-Qaeda or one of the other terrorist organizations.
Finding out who that mysterious senior person is will not be easy.
Abbottabad was teeming with military officials, likely intelligence officials, security officials to protect the Pakistani military. So it was a very difficult operating environment.
It's so difficult that at first, the CIA is focusing the effort on surveillance from space.
You had satellites peering down night and day, trying to get us an image of whoever was working in there. You had electronic eavesdropping equipment that was trying to pick up any signals, be it emails, text messages, cell phone conversations, and you had this new stealthy aircraft that was flying high over Pakistan, trying to get a glimpse of Afghanistan's inside.
After weeks of satellite imagery, the efforts pay off. US intelligence teams manage to identify a figure who occasionally takes walks around the courtyard, but appears to never leave the compound. The analysts are convinced they have found an HVT, a high-value target. They call him the Pacer. The Pacer is very tall. Bin Laden is about 6'4". It's a tantalizing clue, but any attempt to get closer and confirm it is indeed Bin Laden is fraught with risk.
The challenge became, we think we have someone important here, but is it someone high enough on the ranks to risk a manned mission into the country that could completely upset the relationship with Pakistan for years to come?
To try and confirm they have the right man, the CIA activates agents on the ground.
They had a safe house overlooking the compound. where they had Pakistani agents, people spying for the CIA, trying to establish what they call a pattern of life. Who goes in, who goes out, how many people live there, who's interacting with the compound.
There were women and children that would leave, come and go from the compound. They would go shopping. The children, however, seemed to be mostly stayed inside, but they never saw the individual, the tall individual, the pacer as they called him. They never saw him leave the compound itself. So that raised even more suspicions.
The agents soon report on the unusual behavior patterns of the residents.
The house itself had no real connections to the outside world. There was a satellite dish, but there were no phone lines. There were no hard wires beyond some electricity wires going in and out. It's as if these people wanted to live off the grid.
My first reaction when they described the compound in Abbottabad was that we had something that was very unusual.
Neighbors say the compound's residents keep to themselves. Occasionally, they have visitors. Strangely, they burn their trash. In Washington, the analysts are still trying to determine who is the high-value target in the compound. But it's decided there is enough to brief the president.
President Obama's top counterterrorism and intelligence officials go to him and say, look, we think we may have the location where bin Laden is right now. We can't be certain, but given all the other clues that we have, Obama is cautiously optimistic. This is by far the most solid lead they've had on the location of bin Laden in years.
Once the intelligence reached a point where there was at least a higher confidence level about the possibility, the next question we asked was, what should we do operationally?
A group of the president's closest advisors is called in to discuss the new lead. There are many questions on his mind.
Are there military options? What are the diplomatic options? What are the political options here that I'm dealing with? And so he and his advisors began talking about those kind of options, tasking the military and the CIA to come up with options of how you deal with this, assuming bin Laden's there.
Officially, the Situation Room meetings don't exist. The top secret is shared only with a handful of people in the White House.
Whenever they had these meetings at the White House, they weren't even put on the daily schedules that the top national security officials get. There's just a blank space in their calendars.
There's a danger that if bin Laden is among the compound's residents, he may slip away before a plan is hatched. There may be escape routes or tunnels leading out of the compound. They have to act fast. CIA Director Leon Panetta wants to move things to the next stage. He calls in the commander of US Special Forces, Vice Admiral William McRaven.
Bill McRaven is a bit of a legend in the community for a booming voice, a lot of charisma. His guys love him.
He has always been hard-charging, a good, clear thinker, and has always understood that modern warfare changes and special operations has to be flexible.
McRaven oversees JSOC, the Joint Special Operations Command. He wrote the book on Black Ops. He needs to come up with a plan.
The machinery of intelligence and special operations has grown in the past decade plus. The world of counterterrorism operations, in fact, the world of joint operations generally, whether it's pirates or counterterrorism or cartels, is incredibly evolved. I think it's night and day from what we would have had back on 9/11.
In the next weeks, his team will have to figure out if there is enough intelligence to go after the target. If so, what kind of an operation is feasible, and which is the best unit to carry it out? McRaven is looking at what operatives on the ground found through surveillance, satellite imagery, and the analysis of communication intercepts. After reviewing the intelligence, McRaven is ready to present 3 options to the president and his team.
The first option involves a massive bombing campaign by a B-2 bomber. The advantage of this kind of campaign would be kill anybody in the compound. downside, of course, was you'd never be sure bin Laden was ever there.
Another option is a more surgical drone strike. They have proved effective against al-Qaeda before.
A couple of the senior advisors to the president were all for dropping a small munition, a missile, onto the compound. But others were arguing that there were a lot of civilians in the compound, women, children. That would produce many casualties.
And a drone strike would still not guarantee knowing if they had actually killed bin Laden or not. Leaving just one other option.
To ensure that you get the man that you're going after, you send in a commando team. This has the advantage, of course, that you can have eyes on your target. You can be guaranteed that he's killed or captured.
This is a job made for an elite unit like the Navy SEALs.
The public probably isn't aware of how much the CIA and the Navy SEALs have worked together on missions across the world, stopping al-Qaeda, capturing al-Qaeda suspects, sometimes killing them. They perfected this method of hunting a target, grabbing them, and then exploiting the scene, gathering up the evidence, taking it away.
When it came time to get in the op for bin Laden, I mean, they were more than ready. They have more combat experience now than any unit in the world, and they've been fighting more than we've ever fought as a country.
They've been doing a dozen raids a night next door in Afghanistan, and they've been doing it for years. So they had the skills, they were close by, and they've been hunting bin Laden for a decade.
But planning an operation based on limited intelligence is risky. Even after months of concentrated efforts, there's no certainty that bin Laden is indeed in the compound. Rushing to action could needlessly cost the lives of dozens of US troops.
What was the likelihood they were going to have to fight their way out? What was the likelihood of technical failure? And all of those things you've got to plan for, assess the risk against the potential gain.
President Obama is facing the most momentous decision of his career. He needs to choose the best course of action. Bomb the compound from the air, send in a black ops unit, or maybe wait until he is sure bin Laden is there.
The priority was to ensure that you either kill or capture Osama bin Laden, and the only way you could do that was to send in a commando team to do that job.
As the president considers his options, one US Special Ops team is ordered to start preparing. Hand-picked for the job, they are the best of the best. The Navy's top-secret counter-terrorism force, SEAL Team 6.
Well, historically, people didn't talk about SEAL Team 6.
The missions, the tactics, what they do, how they do it, it's all close-held secret.
Inside the Navy, the unit is only known as Dev Group, short for Naval Special Warfare Development Group.
Let's go, here's the out over here!
There are 300 operators at SEAL Team 6. There's a team of a couple thousand people supporting them. Everyone from intelligence to dog handlers to the boat and helicopter folks who get them into the mission.
You can't really train all the other teams to quickly deploy to the jungle, quickly deploy to the desert or the Arctic or an urban. So you have one team made up of the elite who can deploy anywhere in the world.
And that team really is our nation's 911 worldwide call.
Only SEAL operators with years of experience are considered for a job with the team.
You have to screen to become a part of SEAL Team 6. There's an additional years of training, of screening, of requirements that involve.
McCraven knows he can rely on Team 6. He was once a commander with the unit and helped shape it as one of the best counter-terrorism forces in the world.
I think the thing that separates SEAL Team 6 from all others is SEALs just don't quit. They're trained never, ever quit.
Over the last decade, US Special Forces have had a great deal of operational experience.
Thousands of operations have been conducted. Many of them are not on the front page, but almost all have had a significant influence on the direction of the war on terrorism.
One of the few publicly known missions was the rescue of the captain of the Maersk Alabama from Somali pirates who hijacked his boat near the Horn of Africa in 2009.
The hostages were rescued, the snipers, did their hit on the Somali pirates. But for every one that you hear about, there's 100 successes you don't hear about.
In Iraq and Afghanistan, nightly raids have been part of the SEALs mission. They are ready for action.
The SEALs got the go-ahead to start planning for this raid, and a small team worked on a model of the compound, figured out how they would go in, what was the best way to get everyone subdued, kill, capture. They were going to train and train and train and be ready if the president said, get on that plane and get to Pakistan. Not one of them breathed a word to their families or to their other SEAL teammates at SEAL Team 6.
There's one real concern about keeping the mission secret. Should the US involve the Pakistani government? There are worries about trust.
Over time, we saw problems working with Pakistani intelligence. Information going out the back door, for example, when we were cooperating with them.
Too often, when they got a tip, it turned out that an hour before a raid, for instance, mysteriously the target of that raid would disappear. He would have been tipped off.
The president determines that bringing the Pakistanis in on the plan could mean losing the one chance in almost a decade to get Osama bin Laden. But keeping the Pakistanis in the dark makes this raid even more risky.
This is crossing a border, crossing a large territory of Pakistan, a sovereign country, without the knowledge of local security services, with the prospect that local police might get onto you and start shooting you in Abbottabad. The risk factors here were incredible.
The consequences of a potential disaster weigh heavy on the president and his aides. In the back of everyone's mind is the failed Desert One operation to rescue hostages from Iran in 1980. 8 American servicemen were killed when their helicopters collided on the way to the mission. It was a crushing blow for the Carter presidency. And some of those in the room with Obama are still haunted by what came to be known as Black Hawk Down, a special forces operation codenamed Gothic Serpent into Somalia in 1993. Militants shot down 2 US helicopters. At the end of the battle, 18 American soldiers were dead, their bodies mutilated and dragged through the streets of Mogadishu.
These are his top advisors, people like Vice President Biden, Secretary of State Hillary Clinton, Defense Secretary Bob Gates, CIA Director Leon Panetta, and they're all giving their assessments to the president. Some are more skeptical about this than others. Joe Biden, for instance, is a little more skeptical. Gates is skeptical about sending in ground troops. He's the one individual from this group who lived through Desert One. Other intelligence officials, however, including Panetta, were much more bullish.
Secretary of State Clinton, she was convinced that this was the right call to make, even though she lined up all of her doubts before saying, we could be very wrong. We could end up with a bad relationship with Pakistan for a decade to come, but this is the right call to go in.
It's a tough call.
Whenever you're advising the president about a particular operation, it's how certain do you feel that your target's there and that you will have a good opportunity to successfully execute that mission versus what are the likely consequences or potential points of failure.
To stack the odds in his favor, Obama orders additional backup.
The president said, I want to be able to protect these guys and get them out.
Within the White House itself, the top national security aides, the president, and others were actually devising something they called the playbook. It was a 3-ring binder about 2 inches thick, and it was all the various contingencies of what could go right, what could go wrong, things in the middle. What would happen, for instance, if this Navy SEAL team, when it got in on the ground, was engaged by Pakistani soldiers or police? What would you do then?
The president wants another SEAL team ready nearby as a quick reaction force.
One thing that he personally wanted to see was the option to fight their way out if they had to. They didn't want to be pinned down. And so the military went back and devised some backup plans that had additional transport helicopters ready in the chance that there might be a problem.
Even now, the president still hasn't decided whether to green-light the operation. But members of SEAL Team 6 are sent to prepare in North Carolina and in the Nevada desert. An exact replica of the compound is built, especially for them to train for every potential scenario.
You could have landmines, or the whole building could be a trap. And the moment you get in the compound, 4,000 pounds of explosives gets detonated. That's enough to kill the entire force.
They know that they have a bunch of contingencies that they have to prepare for, and that plans don't always go according to plan. We have a saying, plan you dive, then dive you plan.
From the intelligence gathered, the SEALs learn that behind the high walls securing the compound are at least 2 buildings. The mysterious residence and the courier's brother seem to be in the main one. The smaller building houses al-Kuwaiti and his family. To get to them, the SEALs would have to split into 2 groups. One will land in the courtyard and secure the perimeter, and the other will fast rope to the roof, taking the residents by surprise.
Intelligence was critical. Our satellite imagery, our ground intelligence, to the degree we could, we had an understanding of at least the battlefield exterior of the compound.
As the SEALs prepare, the president calls in more experts. He wants fresh eyes on the intelligence, what the pros call a red team exercise. Senior analysts are given everything that's been gathered on the case. Their job is to provide an objective assessment of the intelligence. After reviewing the material, the red team concludes the chances bin Laden is in the compound are only 50-50.
To get the 50-50 in itself, I thought was significant. That might seem like low odds for Vegas. For me as an intelligence professional, that's pretty good odds.
In the last secret White House meeting, the room is still divided on the best plan of action.
As they went around the table, each one of the participants basically is prefacing his or her remarks by saying, Mr. President, we know this is probably the most difficult decision you're going to make. And of course, it got to be a joke as they went around, because they each echo each other as if to kind of shield them from the ultimate responsibility of having to make this decision, knowing, of course, the commander-in-chief will be the one who decides whether to go or not.
I think most of us would have said, the risk here is huge, and the best we could do is to say, boss, I'm going to have to ask you to take a huge risk. That said, I think I would have said, I'm not sure it's going to get any better, and now it's on your back.
It's the ultimate decision for the commander-in-chief. Is he willing to risk the lives of American troops based on so much uncertainty? President Obama says he needs more time to think, but delay carries its own risk.
What happens if you wait so long to have it be perfect that you lose the opportunity?
The next morning, the president calls in his top advisors. He has made up his mind. Operation Neptune Spear is a go.
It was the best information they were going to have. This was bin Laden, and this was the opportunity to strike, the opportunity they'd been looking for years, and the risks were worth it.
The raid is planned for the next day, Saturday, April 30th, with Sunday, May the 1st as an alternative if the weather is bad. As the SEALs prepare for the operation, the president continues with his planned commitments. The White House Correspondents' Dinner is scheduled for Saturday night. The president always attends it.
This is an annual event here in Washington where the president shows up in a black tie. He's usually he's expected to give a funny speech.
All right, everybody, please have a seat.
To make sure the operation remains a secret, everyone has to act as if it's business as usual.
The White House advisors really debated, do we pretend that the president is sick? Do we want him making jokes from the podium, which is the point of that particular dinner, just as the raiders are hitting the compound? What if the helicopters go down? What if you have another Black Hawk Down situation where you lose a whole team?
At the last minute, forecast for cloudy weather delays the mission by 24 hours. (11 p.m. in Jalalabad, Afghanistan. It's a moonless night. 2 Black Hawk helicopters take off from a US airbase. Each is carrying 12 members of Navy SEALs Team 6. The operation to get Osama bin Laden, codenamed Neptune Spear, is finally underway.
Boy, this is a little hairy here. Okay, we are flying into Pakistan. Yeah, this is a go. This is definitely a go. And then it gets more excitement in the air, and everybody starts getting a lot more serious. We're definitely going now. We're going in. It's going in at night.
On the tense flight to Abbottabad, the troops go through last-minute preparations.
And there'll be a very detailed patrol leader's order. It's time you're going in, time you're coming out, what gear you're going to take, who's going to be sitting where in the helos.
These SEALs were hand-picked for the mission because of their specialities and experience. It's the operation they've long been waiting for.
You're going through the what-ifs. You know, what if we get fire upon infiltration? What if the fast rope is in the wrong spot? You know, what if we get around and the helicopter, you know, is downed outside the compound where now you need to protect not only the pilots, you know, where are you going to move them into? You know, you're kind of going through your playbook.
The troops also find time for a personal moment.
The air is so thick. People are saying last-minute prayers and thinking about the families and making sure the weapons loaded, doing press checks, making sure there's a round in the chamber, making sure all the gear is secured, going over last-minute notes with the buddies, thinking of all the details.
Also on board the aircraft, a translator and a dog named Cairo, member of the Canine Unit.
They're for anti-personnel and sniffing things out. Let's go search something for smell, looking for somebody.
Cairo was a veteran of many raids. He'd actually been wounded in a previous raid and had taken 6 months out to recuperate.
The SEALs are flying in new stealth helicopters, specifically designed for this mission.
The SEALs have the state-of-the-art equipment. And every year and every generation, the helicopters get a little faster, a little lighter, a little harder to detect.
The operation pilots are the Night Stalkers, members of the Army's elite 160th Special Aviation Regiment.
We're called Night Stalkers for a reason. We tend to like to fly at night to give us the cover of darkness. Flying in the dark is a lot different than flying in the day, and sound acts differently. Light obviously acts differently. The whole mission is planned to hit the target from an unexpected direction and at an unexpected time.
Journey to the target in Abbottabad takes about 90 minutes. The 2 stealth helicopters manage to cross the border to Pakistan undetected.
You're going to have weather radar, so you can detect storms or electrical storms that could be on the horizon. You're going to have weapons, and these weapons are generally not found in the conventional Army inventory. So these are specifically designed to get onto an objective. A lot of the aircraft today have long-range fuel probes, so they can do aerial refueling.
the original plan, they were going to fast rope down into the outer courtyard. It would have taken 2 minutes to land these guys, and maybe 10 minutes in all to storm both buildings.
Just as he's hovering above the compound, preparing to land, one of the pilots hits serious trouble.
The air was hotter than anyone had expected, and the helicopter lost control because the air was thinner, and the helicopter therefore was heavier and started falling a little bit through space, sliding greasily back and forth.
Drones flying over the compound stream the unfolding disaster back to Vice Admiral McRaven in Jalalabad, the CIA headquarters in Langley, and to the Situation Room in the White House.
They're all jammed in a very small kind of room, listening, watching the feed.
All they could see is the helicopter going down and then crashing and wondering, have we just lost the mission?
With one helicopter down and the loss of the surprise element, the SEALs will have to quickly adapt to the situation, or the whole operation could be compromised.
It landed upright, just landed a little hard. We call that an uncontrolled landing or a hard impact landing. And in that case, it became mechanically impossible for that aircraft to take off.
In the Situation Room, the tensions are running high.
Your heart's in your throat. You don't know at any moment if the Pakistanis are going to come rushing in. You don't know if you're going to hear that the whole mission has been lost.
The White House advisors are desperate to hear if the SEALs survived the crash.
An extremely tense moment until they heard from McRaven, no, the guys are out, the guys are good, and we're prepared for this. We're modifying the plan.
When Admiral McRaven indicated a kind of, this is not a problem, these guys are going to do the job, it gave me a sense of confidence.
In Abbottabad, the pilot buries the nose of the helicopter in the ground.
If failure is not an option, you have to have a way to accomplish the mission.
One thing that's critical to the success is imaginative operators on the ground and people that can shift gears.
The SEALs immediately activate Plan B.
When things go wrong, you're not going to overreact. You have a checklist, and you can get through just about anything.
They quickly organize themselves to storm the compound from the ground.
The first thing the guys have to do is get a full head count, make sure everybody's there.
But the crash has caused noise.
The town's awake. And so they're thinking any minute now we can be run down with a lot of enemy forces coming at us.
Fearing they've lost the element of surprise, they know every second is now critical.
And once you're at the door's got to be breached. As soon as the door's breached, people in, left, right, left, right, left, right, and then you make movement.
The SEALs make it to the courtyard. Now they must get to the main building where they think bin Laden may be.
There were these knots of children who were trying to avoid getting caught, trying to avoid getting hit, and not knowing what to do or where to run.
They still don't know who else is in the compound and how many people are armed.
And they're just moving, going through danger areas, moving, checking stairways, clearing so people go up stairways.
When someone opens fire, they engage. With still no sign of bin Laden, the SEALs move to clear the next building. They find that most entrances and pathways are barricaded or blocked.
The key is to have the standard operational procedures that allow a unit to flow through a structure like that, keeping the target in mind, keeping security in mind.
They get a closed door, they know to get security on it, people blast through the door.
From his headquarters in Langley, CIA Director Leon Panetta is narrating the action for the president.
We had heard that shots had been fired. We really weren't quite sure what was happening. It was a good 15 or 20 minutes of silence in the sense of what exactly was going on.
They are inside the main building. The young man they've just shot matches the description of bin Laden's son. They advance up the stairs leading to the top floor.
Osama bin Laden pokes his head around the doorway. One of the first SEALs in the line knows that's bin Laden.
The operational signal for sighting their target is sent to the command, Geronimo.
The signals were set out by alphabet, A, B, C, D. G was securing Osama bin Laden, G for Geronimo.
They gun down bin Laden with the signature double tap. One shot to the chest and one to the head.
In the Situation Room, it was, we got him, we think, wait, maybe, we hope.
Those were very long and tortuous moments, waiting for the word.
They move in to confirm they got the right man. A message is sent back, EKIA, enemy killed in action. One of them pushes bin Laden's widows out of the way. He has to assume they may be wearing suicide vests. One of the women is bleeding from gunfire ricochets. They collect DNA samples.
The SEALs started evidence collection, taking photographs of bin Laden's face and sending those back so that two waiting teams in the CIA, who were facial recognition experts, measuring the length of the nose, the length of the jaw.
The operation is not complete. Bin Laden was running Al-Qaeda from the compound. The evidence he left behind could be used to prevent future attacks.
It took them 19 minutes to get to bin Laden, and then in the rest of the time, they were going from room to room, looking for computers, cell phones, documents, anything that might tell them what bin Laden had been doing there for the past 6 years, and anything that might lead them to other parts of the network.
But every minute they spend gathering material puts the teams at greater risk. One of the helicopters positioned nearby makes its way to the compound to assist in evacuating them.
We have everybody. We have the aircraft. Are we exiting on the right route?
Before taking off, one team blows up the crashed helicopter, making sure its classified design features and technology will not fall into the wrong hands. In the early morning hours, the SEAL teams finally make it back to Jalalabad. Before being taken away, Al-Qaeda's leader is identified with almost 100% certainty. Hours later, his body will arrive at the USS Carl Vinson, and bin Laden will be given a burial at sea. The White House team is getting ready to announce the news to the world. America's #1 most wanted terrorist is dead.
When the helicopters got back over the border into Afghanistan, and it dawned on the people inside the Situation Room and the top CIA officials that they've done it. Looks like we've got bin Laden and all the SEALs and all the team supporting them is safely out. That's when people quietly started popping the champagne bottles.
Good evening. Tonight, I can report to the American people and to the world that the United States has conducted an operation that killed Osama bin Laden, the leader of al-Qaeda, and a terrorist who's responsible for the murder of thousands of innocent men, women, and children.
When President Obama goes to congratulate the SEALs who took part in the mission a few days later, the question of the identity of the SEAL who shot bin Laden comes up. They collectively answer, "We all did, sir." The team then hands the President an American flag with an inscription saying, "Operation Neptune Spear, May 1st, 2011, for God and country, Geronimo."